What's up guys, Tim Little, welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today's video, we are talking fall fishing, more importantly, the fall drawdown, how the water level on your fishery affects the fish positioning, and baits to catch them. Let's go. Today we are back inside. We got the leftovers of Hurricane Zeta or Zeta, however you want to pronounce it. I've lost track of these tropical storms rolling through eastern Tennessee. But today we're back inside. It's supposed to rain, I don't know, an inch or two today. And going through some tackle, thought that I would shoot this video for you guys. So the fall, we've covered the fall transition. We've covered, fish positioning. But what we haven't really talked about this go around is the fall drawdown and how it really affects the fish, their feeding patterns and their positioning, and just overall how it affects the fish and how to catch them. Depending on the type of fishery you have, and we'll kind of get into that, we'll break that down. But depending on the type of fishery you have, it's going to affect your fish differently. And so today's video, I'm going to talk about the positioning, how the fish, how you can target them, and more importantly, the best baits to effectively target those suspended fish, because that's really what happens. When this water level drops down, those fish back off the shorelines and head out over deep water. So gonna be a good one today. So first off, let's talk about the types of fisheries. I like to break down the fisheries into two categories. Typically you have a Highland reservoir and a Lowland reservoir. And the easiest way, if you're looking at a map, the easiest way to figure out what type of fishery you are fishing, when you're looking at a map and you see a map of the lake and there's a bunch of fingers, big arms coming off the main body, it almost looks like a spider web, right, if you will. I'll throw up some screenshots for you. But if it looks like that, and you have a fairly shorter dam, not height-wise, but width-wise, so a narrower dam, but it's typically taller, that's gonna be your Highland reservoir. That's gonna be your deep water fishery. It's gonna have bluffs and sheer walls and steep canyons, that sort of thing. Now, on the opposite, or the flip side, the lowland reservoirs, you're gonna have long flats, long grass flats, typically standing timber or brush piles, and the dams on those fisheries are long and drawn out, so they go for a long time. Thinking back out in California, Shasta, Oroville, not fairly long dams, but they're super tall. Some of those drawdowns on those lakes, it could be 100 to 200 feet a year, so there's lots of elevation change in those types of reservoirs. And then obviously most of your Texas lakes, Lake Fork, that sort of stuff, that's gonna be your lowland reservoir. And you're not gonna have as much depth change, but you're gonna have a lot of distance change from that water pulling back from those different fingers. It affects, it comes farther back with that lower, flatter terrain. When you're pulling water off of some of these sheer walls, those fish just back out a couple feet and now they're over, a comfortable water level depth. Whereas you take a couple feet out of a back of a really shallow bay, those fish are gonna have to completely reposition and find new places to ambush their food. So today's video, that's what we're talking about. And more importantly, baits, top 5 or 6 baits to effectively catch those fish that pull out and suspend. I truly believe that dialing in the suspended fish game, if you will, that is really, truly the last frontier in bass fishing. Electronics have come along they've really helped. Right now you have 360 imaging, you have a lot of live imaging. So technology's come a long way to really help the angler target those suspended fish. But if you can figure out how to effectively pattern those fish and stay on them and throw the right baits, that is my belief as the last frontier in bass fishing, and that is one of the major untapped fish, if you will, in all of fishing, right? Everybody pounds the bank. A lot of people will fish that deep structure, but there's a lot of lot of fish in between that go out and suspend and typically don't get fished for very often, and they're pretty much untapped. So now that we have an idea of what a Highland reservoir is and a Lowland reservoir, let's talk about the Highland reservoir, those fish, and then we'll talk about the Lowland, and then we'll jump over into baits and go from there. But Highland reservoir, again, you're gonna have a shorter width-wise dam, a lot taller, a lot deeper. Typically, you're gonna have clear water. You're gonna have rivers coming in, clear water, colder water. Those deeper reservoirs, their water level fluctuates so much. Again, like I said, out there in the West Coast, you know, some of the big reservoirs, Oroville, Shasta, some of those lakes will drop hundreds of feet in a single season, which, you know, if you think about it, you step back, you think about it, that's a lot of water moving. That's a lot of area that those fish have to reposition. So let's take the Highland reservoir. So as you know, you're out there fishing, and you know, you get out there, you notice that they're pulling water, right? A lot of these lakes, you can actually go online and look up how much water they're gonna pull. You know, CFS, how much water's coming in, how much they're pulling. But you notice that the water's dropping. Instantly, you know, or you need to know that those fish are gonna back away from the bank. You know, think about yourself as a fish. If you're a fish and you're in a puddle, right? You're in a lake or something, and all of a sudden that water starts receding, you're gonna start getting really antsy, not knowing what's going on. So those fish get really, really nervous, really skittish up shallow, because that water over their dorsal fin is getting lower and lower, so they start to back out. So that's what I really wanna drive home is those fish, as that water level recedes, those fish just back out to deeper water, and they are still catchable. We're gonna get to that, but understand if you have that situation, you know, it's fall time and that water is starting to recede, get off of the bank, start looking for deeper humps out offshore, you know, humps that come up into that 20, 30 foot range, but that have a good amount of water over the top of them still. And again, out west or some of these fisheries out here, that could be gone in a couple weeks, right? You may have been fishing 20 or 30 feet over that hump. The next time you go to launch your boat, that hump might be 50 feet out of water, right? So that's why you gotta stay on your game. Use some of those Google Earth tips that I showed a couple videos ago, I don't know, a few weeks ago. I'll link that down below in the video description. But continue to adjust. Every day is a different day on the water, especially with that water level dropping. So that's what you're gonna look for. You're gonna look for humps. You're gonna look for long tapering points that those fish can kind of back out on as that water level recedes. They get farther and farther out on that point. Eventually, depending on how much water they drop, that point's gonna be out of water, and that's when you're gonna wanna go to your next deepest water area. You know, so if you're up a river arm, you know, get into some of those creek channels, that's where those fish are gonna back out to and suspend above. Now, Lowland reservoirs, pretty much the same, except for when I think of a lowland reservoir, I think of something, like I said, with big flats. But I'm thinking grass, I'm thinking of stump fields, timber, that sort of stuff. So as that water level recedes, those fish are gonna back out to that hardest structure. You know, think of a lake like Lake Fork, right? So many submerged trees. So up shallow, as that water level recedes and it starts dropping, those fish are gonna back out. They're gonna back out to that real prominent grass line. They're gonna back out to maybe some kind of rock pile or standing timber. So, you know, the elevation's not dropping as much because those fisheries aren't typically as deep, but they're gonna be moving, and they're gonna move to that hardest structure. The Highland reservoirs, typically you don't have a lot of hard structure that they can move out to, but if you do, look at those treetops. You know, if you have treetops that are standing in 40, 50 feet, that water level starts receding, coming down, those fish back out off the shore, definitely go check out those treetops, and you will be surprised with how many fish actually pull to that, suspend there, and how many of them you can really catch. So hopefully that kind of breaks down real quickly the differences between the Highland and the Lowland reservoirs. Again, if you have any questions, look at the map, look at the width of the dam. You know, if you have a dam that runs 5 miles, 6 miles, 10 miles, whatever it may be, versus a dam that is really short but hundreds and hundreds of feet tall, That will definitely clue you in on the type of fishery you have. Then look at the shoreline. You got real steep bluffs, canyons, rock walls, that sort of stuff, real sheer. Highland. If you got real long flats, you're going lowland. Now the third thing that I want to talk about real quick as far as fish positioning is going to be these fisheries with current. You know, out here on Chickamauga, obviously we're in the Tennessee Valley, so not only do we have the drawdown where they're dropping the water levels for wintertime, but you also have currents jumping up and down depending on what the upper and lower dams are doing on the chain. And as far as fish positioning, it has so much to do with how and where they position. So take any of your backwaters off of the main river channel. Now this is going to apply to any of these types of fisheries. Your main entry points off of the main river channel to all of your backwaters, if they are letting in more water than they are letting out, that fishery is going to backflow, and that water is going to come from the main current into the backwater. So you're going to want to fish the main entryways, and the fish are going to be facing the main channel. Now flip it over, vice versa. If they are pulling more water than letting out, that water level is going to be receding. Those fish are going to back out of the pockets, and they're going to be facing towards the, on your current seams, they're going to be facing towards the current, towards the back of those cuts. Hopefully that makes sense. Now that we've covered the different types of reservoirs, we've covered how to tell them on maps. What I really want to key in on today is the Highland reservoir stuff, because like I said in the beginning, suspended fish is key. Lowland reservoir stuff, those fish are going to back out of those cuts. They're going to find that hard grass line. They're going to find some type of structure to relate to. The Highland reservoir fish, you know, when you start pulling that water off of that sheer wall, they don't have any structure typically to pull to. So they're going to back off and just suspend. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today, about the best baits to effectively target those fish. Because again, like I said before, if you as a fisherman can figure out those offshore suspended fish, not fish that are down on the bottom, you know, in 40, 50 feet, not fish that are right on surface, but the fish that are in that water column down 15 feet, 20 feet, over 150 feet, if you can effectively target those fish, you will do very, very well for yourself. So let's talk about the suspended fish, because that is today's video, how to effectively target those fish. And it could be so much fun. Hopefully some of you guys have witnessed or experienced fish suspended out over deep water, just grenading bait, right? You see it in videos, you see it in fishing stuff. When you are fishing deep water and those fish push that bait up and they're just exploding, grenading on those bait balls, it is really, really hard to beat some kind of topwater. So you always, I always have all of these baits tied on if I'm fishing in the fall time. You know, a lot of the videos lately we've talked about blade baits, we've talked about lipless cranks, we've talked about crankbaits, chatterbait, all sorts of stuff, right? A lot of that stuff is really targeted towards fish that are fairly shallow. Yes, you can fish with blade bait deep, but you're fishing it on bottom. Today we're talking about how to target those fish that are suspended, and a topwater. All these baits I have tied on, but you have to have a topwater, some kind of topwater tied on, even if it's a popper or some kind of buzz bait or a whopper plopper, something like that. But I typically go with some kind of walking bait. Now here's why. When those fish are busting, I'm gonna fire out, I'm gonna walk that bait very, very quickly, very erratically. I want those fish to hear that bait. I want them to target that bait and eat it. You know, if I'm sitting there with a popper and they're blowing up and I'm slowly working, it's a lot harder to get them to commit. But if I can work a bait that has some rattle to it, that goes side to side, it doesn't cover a lot of distance to me, that is what I have found has worked the best for those fish that are schooling and blowing up offshore. So definitely have some kind of walking bait. You know, we've talked about all of these different techniques in depth, but understanding the sound, you know, this is the shower blow, it's got a lot deeper sound to it. cup face, a little spitting action versus the rover, a lot higher pitch sound. The tackle kick knocker, another great bait, but some kind of topwater walking bait is my go-to. Now that is when I know that I know where they're at because I'm visibly seeing them blowing up on bait. It's very easy to make a cast to. I can see where they're at. The rest of these baits is going to be more using your electronics. If you have 360 imaging or some kind of live imaging where you can see out in front of you, that 360 imaging has been amazing for not just shallow fishing, but open water fishing and seeing the bait balls coming towards me. But the rest of these baits are going to be baits that I've had a lot of success in effectively targeting those fish that are suspended. Your big spotted bass, Bullard's bar, your big, large, all of them, big largemouth at Berryessa. But after that, after the topwater, because that's the easy one, right? That's seeing, that's casting, that's working the bait. After that, my number one bait is going to be an Alabama rig. Some sort of Alabama rig, either straight finesse, no flash, or something with a little flash, some teasers, some blades on it. That's totally up to you. The clearer the water, I go less flash. If the dingier water, I will add some flash. Sometimes I'll even add gold blades if it's really stained. But suspended fish in muddy water is almost impossible. So those are days like today where you just don't go out. But an Alabama rig, again, you're mimicking a school of bait fish. And what's easy about all of these baits is you can count them down. Now what I mean by that, drop your bait into the water and count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, and kind of measure, eyeball how deep and how fast that bait went. Now, if you're using your electronics and you know these fish are suspended 20 feet over 100 feet, right? As that water level recedes, they back out, drop down, 20 feet over 150 feet. Fire this bait out there, count it down, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, whatever it may be, and start reeling. Every 5 or 6 handle turns, especially in the open water, twitch, twitch, get that thing really, really moving. You don't have to be as aggressive on the twitches in open water if you are fishing around treetops. So say now your fish are suspended in 20 feet over 150 feet or 100 feet, but there's a 100-foot pine tree or 80-foot pine tree and they're 20 feet down in that treetop. When you get close to that treetop, twitch, twitch. You want those real twitches. You want that bait twitching near whatever structure they are suspending on. Open water, just think about it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, twitch, twitch. 1, 2, 3, and you will learn your cadence. But an Alabama rig, you can go with a single swim bait if you want. If you can't throw an A rig in a tournament or you don't like it or whatever, you can go with a single swim bait rigged. You can go with a big 8-inch Huddleston, something like that, a little bit more drawing power. But for me, the Alabama rig is my number one subsurface bait. Now, my number 2 and number 3 are, I think, effectively target those fish equally. I just think that you get a bigger bite going with the glide bait, and so that is my number 2 subsurface bait. Again, learn where these fish are suspending in the water column. Learn your bait. Caught so many fish counting down a glide bait. Now, if you know that your S-waver falls 1 foot every 2 seconds, now you can effectively count this bait out. Fire it out there, count it down to the right depth these fish are suspended at. Again, today's video, suspended fish, how to effectively target them. Again, you will have a lot of success. You will win a lot of money if you can effectively target and put those fish in the boat, because again, a lot of people get overwhelmed, because it's a combination of things, right? It's learning the environment, how fast the water's dropping, using your electronics, your side imaging, your 360, whatever it is, finding those fish, finding where they're at, and now how to target them. So counting down a glide bait. I don't care if you're on Shasta or Lake Fork, wherever you are, Highland, Lowland, whatever type of fishery you have, when you know the water level and you know how fast it's receding and you know how deep those fish are positioned, now you can count down and put this right in their face. Fire this thing out, again, count it down, and get to work in that open water in the Highland reservoirs and around the structure in the Lowland reservoirs, and that glide bait will put giant bass in the boat. With that said, a jerkbait, knowing the effective diving depth of a jerkbait, now you can position your boat, you can position yourself on the water. You know, if you need to be shallow but casting out deep, now you can effectively target those fish at that right water level. Now again, these fish are suspended. Typically, they're looking up. So you don't want to be fishing below these fish. You want to be fishing above them. So if you're throwing like a 110 +1 or a +2, you're getting real deep. You don't want to go too deep where you're fishing below them. Like I said, you want to be fishing right above their heads or right through them. So these two, obviously a jerkbait, you're getting real aggressive. Rip, 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 pause, rip, 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 pause. Slow down your cadence, slow down your aggressiveness as the water temps drop. But as that water is receding, those fish still need to eat. A jerkbait is another must-have. So that's my number 3. Now the last two I want to talk about real quick, and then we'll kind of hang it up for today. But finesse fishing. 2 different techniques, 2 different approaches, and they both work great. One is, it's like watching paint dry. You gotta be on your game. You gotta be using a bright color braid, and that is throwing a weightless wacky worm. If you wanna talk about something that a lot of people don't do, you want to talk about something that has produced a lot of big fish for Matt and I. It is throwing a weightless stick bait in 20 or 30, 40 feet of water. Again, you know where those fish are positioned at, right? You don't get much more unintrusive than a weightless wacky worm just slowly falling down in front of their face. But in order to do that, you gotta fire out, you gotta watch your line, because you can't put any tension on that line. If you have tension on that line, what's it gonna do? It's gonna bring that bait to you, right? You don't want that. You want that bait to fall straight down. So I highly, highly recommend, if you're throwing this on a spinning setup, go with some kind of bright braid or bright backing, whatever line you're gonna use, and then I'll tie a fluorocarbon leader. I go with something bright because I can use that connection knot to my leader as like a strike indicator. So, perfect example. Again, I don't, houseboats, floating campsites, floating bathrooms, anything that gives those fish the comfort or the just makes them feel like they have something to relate to, target those. So if you have a houseboat, or you have out in California, we have floating campsite or floating bathrooms. So if you have a floating bathroom over 300 feet of water, but you're only 50 yards from shore, go throw a weightless Senko. Again, won so much money doing it. Definitely out on Oroville and stuff. But if you haven't done that already, try throwing a weightless wacky worm over those suspended fish. Fire it out there, count it down on slack line, and you have to be you have to be on it, right? Because you don't want these fish swallowing it, because then they're pooping it out before you even realize you have a fish on. But a weightless wacky worm is lights out on suspended fish. If you have the patience to do that, most guys don't. If you have the patience to slow down and fish a weightless worm in open water, you will have success. I guarantee it. Now, the last technique I want to talk about is very similar, but you don't have to be as it doesn't go as slow, right? So you don't have to be as committed to just sitting there and just staring at your line and just waiting for that little tick or that little line flinch, right? The last thing I want to talk about is throwing a swim bait. I mean, you can throw whatever bait you want on it, but I have a lot of confidence in, a lot of success in throwing a swim bait on a drop shot. But again, that same scenario, those fish are suspended 20, 30 feet over deep water. The benefit of throwing a swim bait on a drop shot, fire it out there past those fish, past that school of fish, close your bail, and what this is gonna do, it's gonna pendulum down on tight line, as that bait falls, it's gonna swim its way back to you as it drops down into the water column. So you have a swim bait that is changing depth, it's kicking on its way down, it's also coming towards you. So 2 different ways I fish it. Just like that, fire it out there, close the bail and let it fall and swim down through, fall down and swim down through that school of fish. Or if I'm directly above them, if I'm directly above that treetop, or I'm directly above that school of fish and I'm looking at it looking at the spaghetti on my electronics, drop that bait straight down, and now I can vertically fish that swim bait, bring it up, drop it down, bring it up, drop it down, let that thing swim up and drop down, swim up, drop down. You can target those suspended fish with the drop shot and the swim bait. So there is, guys, fall time. You know, it's kind of a crapshoot, right? Depending on the fishery, depending on the weather, depending on a lot of things. But if you can effectively target those fish that are pulling off the bank, that are backing out of the cuts, and you know where they're gonna be, with these baits right here, you guys will have success. You know, fall time, analyze your fisheries, take lots of notes, take lots of pictures, get on Google Earth Pro. Anything you can do to put the odds in your favor, that's what we're all about, guys. So do your research, take lots of notes, like I said, take lots of pictures. You know, everybody has a cell phone in their pocket these days. When you're out on the water and you're fishing, you know, the water's down 150 feet and you're like, wow, I have never seen this rock pile before. Get your lineup, however you want to be, snap a picture. Now you know next time the water's up, what that lineup and where that structure is. You know, you can go find it and then you can waypoint it. And then now, next time as that water is receding, before that rock pile is exposed, now you can fish that rock pile at the different depth ranges before it is completely exposed and hopefully pick off your new PB, or at least have a lot of fun catching a bunch of fish. Hopefully today's video helped you guys out. Again, hate doing these videos inside. I'd much rather be doing them outside, but it's fall and it's part of it, right? And this whole hurricane, tropical storm was kind of new to us, being from the West Coast, but I'd much rather have this than no rain at all, and fisheries that are losing all their water. So as always, guys, we appreciate you. If you learned something from this video, or if you guys haven't already, please like and subscribe. If you guys have any comments for bait suggestions or questions, please leave those down below in the comment section. Again, we appreciate you guys. Have a good one.